Can you hear me? Hello? Am I audible?
I can hear you, Jamal.
Okay, that's good. Now, this week we will be covering cybersecurity risk management. There are two parts based on the recommended textbook. I will cover chapter 6, which is one part of the risk management. And next week, I'll cover the second part of cybersecurity risk management. These 2 weeks are very, very important. And almost everything that you have question on assignment is covered in both these lectures. So please let me know if you have any questions while I'm talking about these 2 lectures, and try to understand the concepts. The assignment, unless you understand these concepts that are covered in this lecture and the next week lecture, it will be very difficult. Okay, as I said, I will be talking part 1 of the cybersecurity risk management. This is basically, we are making a risk-based approach to control vulnerabilities, threats, and so forth. So every organization that has, let's say, 100 or more computing devices or smart gadgets really need to do this risk analysis and risk management and risk evaluations to ensure that they actually are not really behind and get affected. So, for example, to install a security control, you actually need to know the risk you are facing. That's why we do risk analysis, okay? So you need to understand the risks you are facing. This means you need to make risk-based decisions. Oh, no. This means, again, to make risk-based decisions, you need to follow risk management process to figure out really the level of risk that your assets, each of your assets, or the level of risk the organization faces. Okay, so to perform risk management process, we need to collect data on our assets, vulnerabilities, potential threats. These are the most important things. We need data to do risk management. So you need to, risk management involves, as I will talk about it later on, we need to know, collect data on assets, collect data on vulnerabilities, and collect data on potential threats. Okay, and then we use some sort of either quantitative or qualitative methods to compute potential risks. So these are the background and lecture objectives that I'll be covering today. Okay. What is cybersecurity risk management? Basically, it is a process this process allows you to quantify and qualify risk. So you need really this both quantification and qualification of risks. It allows you to compare it to really, you need also predefined risk, and you need to compare what you actually calculated and quantified with the pre-existing risks. These predefined risks are risk tolerance, and we will also look at risk appetite, and there are other risks that we will be talking about. So these both risk acceptance and risk appetite are predefined, that we actually need to compare them with the one we calculated. So the risk management process allows you to compute uh, risk factors for current risk factors for the organization, and then compare that with risk tolerance and risk appetite to decide whether to control the risk or mitigate the risk, or to completely avoid the risk, and so forth. So this is what risk management is all about. Now, when I talked about risk tolerance, I will define it shortly. You need to understand that both risk tolerance and risk appetite are organization specific. They are not the same for every organization. Every organization actually define their own maximum acceptable level of this risk and risk appetite as well. Now, some of the critical components of cybersecurity risk management include that no organization is free of cybersecurity risks. We call this inherent risk. So every organization has some sort of inherent cybersecurity risk. In fact, World Economic Forum considers cybersecurity risk as the most, or at least the third largest threat to the businesses and nations as well. Uh, Another factor is the requirements by regulators, partners, and other stakeholders. So organizations are forced to undertake risk management because there are regulations that mandate risk management. Other organizations and stakeholders are starting now to impose risk management process, because if there is supply chain management issues there, if this business goes under, there is a possibility that the other businesses depend on this particular organization will be affected. So risk management now is becoming not only mandated by regulations and laws, but also organizations that do business with other organizations are start uh, requiring it. Uh, Risk management also helps you to determine serious vulnerabilities, and by actually identifying vulnerabilities and patching them on time, you avoid wasting a lot of money, and also buying unnecessary controls to non-harmful vulnerabilities instead of serious vulnerabilities. Some organizations simply spend a lot of money buying controls that are not really harmful vulnerabilities. So you can avoid both of these issues by undertaking risk management. Now, is it visible? Examining every asset uh, for risks. Anyone? or if I can change around, you want to do risk assessment. So would you be doing trying to solve every risk, every vulnerability? I think it's not practically visible, right? There are so many vulnerabilities, there are so many assets, so there are so many risks, in other words. So we need to somehow come up with a way of prioritizing these risks. And we need to actually come up with a way of saying, okay, this asset is mission critical, this asset is business critical. We need to focus on this one. If this has vulnerabilities, these vulnerabilities are very damaging. So we need to control these vulnerabilities before this one. So these are really the type of activities we will be engaging in when we do risk analysis or risk management. Okay.
Yeah, hi, Jamal.
Yep.
Sorry. So we can do like from we can choose the priority like critical and then high, medium, low to like solve the issues and risk from top to bottom and with the asset criticality as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What we're gonna do, I'll talk about all this. What you actually just said is there is a way that we can quantify uh, all of them. So remember, in risk management, we only consider uh, few items: assets, vulnerabilities, threats. So we can actually quantify them qualitatively or quantitatively. We can put numbers on their risk level, for example, or we can use subjective values such as high, low, medium that you said. We will look at each one of these in turn, but I allow you to use both in the assignment. But you really need to think about in terms of what you wanted to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Again, risk management is on the surface looks very easy, but it is very complex, really, really complex operations. And we have to use some sort of formal methodology. There are many formal methodologies. As you can see here, there is Octave, which is a process for identifying and analyzing critical assets and vulnerabilities. Very much used in risk analysis. And then we have NIST. Again, this is a very comprehensive guide. It really gives you guidelines how you perform risk management, and it focuses actually on IT systems. There is another system, FAIR. FAIR is also another very important system. It is a quantitative method of risk analysis, and it is used for assessing and analyzing particularly information security risks, very much related to what we do here. The OSEP is a non-profit organization. They are actually have open community development plan where everyone actually put on their ideas on how to do risk management and risk analysis and risk evaluation and so forth. But their focus is mostly on web application security. Okay, so they have a model for risk management as well. Microsoft has two different methods. One is called DREAD and the other one is called STRIDE. DREAD is for assessing the severity of software security flaws, vulnerabilities in particular, whereas STRIDE, a threat classification model, used mostly for cybersecurity analysis. These two are also very common in the cybersecurity risk management. FRAP is another one. Again, this one gives you a qualitative risk assessment methodology, and it allows you also to prioritize risks. Now, you can see that there are different types of risk assessment, risk management, risk assessment, risk evaluation models. Sometimes they only do qualitative, sometimes they only do quantitative, but in between that you can see, for example, DREAD from Microsoft is more focusing on assessing the severity of software security flaws, vulnerabilities. Okay, the STRIDE from Microsoft again is focused on threat classification and security analysis as well. So FAIR is actually giving you quantitative methods. FRAP is actually giving you qualitative methods. NISTA is basically a guideline. So Octave is focusing on the identification of critical assets and vulnerabilities. So you can see that each one of these brings at least some aspect to risk management. Now, what I haven't added in this list is we have also hybrid, where you can actually combine all of these. You can use Octave, for example, threat analysis and vulnerability assessment and so forth. You can use factor analysis, information risk model to quantitatively assess risk. You can use FRAP to qualitatively assess risks. So we will actually discuss about hybrid in this class as well. Now, your textbook actually spends a lot of time on NIST risk management framework, and I will also follow this risk management framework. Now, this is basically a guide, as I said in the previous slide. It is a guide for risk management, how risk management should be performed. So while this framework is provided as an example, I just want you to be aware of the fact that there are many different ways of how to perform risk management in the organization. So it's not by any means the only way to do risk management. There are others, but we will actually follow NIST risk management framework because the textbook follows it, and it is free guide and most well-known guide as well. So that is why I am actually following it. But each organization must decide which framework they want to use. There are ISO frameworks, for example, very expensive and almost at the end of the day you will get the same product out with the free NIST framework. But if you use ISO, for example, it's not difficult to also use NIST framework and vice versa as well. So almost all existing guidelines are basically interchangeable. The NIST framework is divided into two parts. I will discuss each part separately. Now, the first part of NIST framework, by the way, we will be talking about this and many other frame models and practices in week 8 and week 9. So I'll just give you a brief outline here. Now, this is the first component. As you can see, they are actually connected, but I wanted to talk about each part separately. So this particular part of the framework explains the activities that need to be performed by the governance and risk management teams. There are two teams in risk management. So they are the team that actually implement the risk management, and the governance team that actually sanctions the project. So the governance team, which is on top, as you can see here, explains the activities. The governance team decides or give green lights for the risk management project to start. That's one aspect of their contribution to the risk management process. And the other thing is that they actually tell or request everyone in the organization to cooperate with the risk management team. So they actually basically sending a signal that you will be, somebody from the risk management team will come and ask you a lot of questions, and you need to cooperate with them, because the executive sanctioned this process or project. These are two very important aspect of risk management. Without the upper level management sanction, the risk management team will not get anywhere, and will not collect any substantial information to do risk analysis. Now, the risk management team is the one, as I said, design and implement the risk management project. So every other step that you see in this cycle is what the risk management team does. And at the end of this process, there are two elements, or two elements come out of this process that you can see here. The first one is the risk appetite. Okay. So I'll talk about this risk appetite in the next slide. But make sure, just understand that the risk appetite is actually developed by the senior management, example, CEO, chief information security officers, and so forth. So they are the one that really articulate the risk appetite. Risk appetite does not actually remain fixed, but it is dynamically changed over time. We will actually look at them later on. The other element that comes out of that discussion is risk tolerance. I'll talk about both of them here. Now, here is the risk tolerance is an operational level. I want you to understand, again, link this risk tolerance and risk appetite. They are statements written exactly like I discussed in week 3 when I talked about mission, vision, value. So they are statements. But these risk tolerance and risk appetite are actually linked with either operational level, tactical level, or strategic level. So the risk tolerance is an operational level metric. It defines the specific level of risk an organization is willing to accept for a particular asset. Okay. Now, it is very important to understand it is a metric, it is operational level, and it is a specific level of risk an organization wants to accept for its assets, for each asset actually. Now, the textbook expresses it qualitatively, in other words, with subjective value like very low, low. And so I actually also used a similar thing here. But quite often, risk tolerance is not actually, does not use these subjective values. Instead, we use numbers to express the statement. So, for example, here I have very low tolerance for the failure of physical security measure. The main point here is that the organization, they don't really they don't really they care very, very much about these physical security measures, and it is one of the highly because it is very low tolerance, so it is one of the top issues that we need to focus on when we do risk analysis or risk assessment. But as I said, risk assessment is mostly expressed in terms of numbers, not like this very, very low. Example, maximum acceptable failure, maximum acceptable loss, maximum acceptable downtime, and so forth. If I actually rewrite this example, I will actually say for our cybersecurity operations, we will tolerate a maximum of 2 failure of physical security. So I'm actually specifying it in numbers, a maximum of 2 failure per year, also with a maximum downtime of 4 hours per incident. So this is how risk tolerance is expressed with numbers. The main reason is always when we talk about operational level, we tend to, it is more measurable, and isn't even tactical level. It is measurable to have some sort of numerical values, very low, high, and all these subjectives always are associated with strategic level. So at this, because risk tolerance is operational level, better use numbers in the same example I gave you here. Now, so risk appetite, it is the statement, it is the level of risk an organization is willing to balance potential rewards and negative impacts. So the organization will take risks, but that risk has to be balanced with, what rewards I get if I take on the risk, and what are the negative impacts by taking the risk. So again, it is the level of risk that an organization willing to take. It is strategic level. It has broad scope as it defines the overall willingness of the organization. Remember, risk tolerance is per asset, as you can see for each asset, but risk appetite is organization level, strategic level, and it has broad scope. So every department will be linked to this when they do their risk analysis. It also sets boundaries. It defines the overall risk profile of the organization. Very, very important. Okay, most of the time we use qualitative, which is subjective value here, as high, low, medium. It is okay because we are actually talking about risk in terms of strategic level, and not operational or tactical level. Now, we have here an example, and in this example, you can see that Metro Geelong is willing to take on significant risk in pursuit of rapid growth and innovation. Now, if I ask you, what information you can extract from the Metro Geelong's risk appetite? Anyone? By reading this, if you are a cybersecurity manager, so this is what you get, okay? And based on this, you need to design risk management process and then develop strategies to mitigate those risks. What?
Jamal, I think we can't hear you.
Oh, no?
Oh, sorry.
Hear him.
That was my issue. Sorry. My bad. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So what information this particular risk appetite exposed about Metro Geelong? Can you see in this statement that the executive are prioritizing growth and innovation, even if it means taking on greater uncertainty or risks? Can you see that? No? Okay. Well, what this risk appetite basically says is that the senior management or the organization itself is willing to invest in emerging technologies, and they want to enter new markets, and they want to form partnerships with high-risk partners. It also indicates a tolerance for significant risks. So this really contrasts with a low-risk appetite, where an organization might prioritize stability and avoid risk. This risk venture. So this is high risk venture, but there are low risk ventures as well. Now, on the right hand side, you will see some properties of risk appetite. Okay, so it has to be aligned with the business goals. When you define the risk appetite, must be linked with business goals. It covers all important parts of the business as well. Risk taking has to be involved in there. The company is willing to take on some level of risk when you formulate risk appetite. It is formally documented. It is a statement from the management. It has to be realistic. So it can't actually be something arbitrary. It has to also be, the company has to be prepared to accept a certain amount of loss, be it negative outcomes, for example. It must be regularly reviewed, and the board needs to approve the risk appetite. These are some of the characteristics of risk appetites. The second part of the risk management is dealing with the process itself. The first one is with some sort of initiating the project. The second part is actually doing the process and implementing the risk management project. The risk management process has three different phases: establishing the context, conducting the risk assessment process, and then finally conducting also or coming up with the way of mitigating the risk for those risks that are unacceptable or regarded as unacceptable to the organization. So based on the risk appetite and risk tolerance level. Okay. Now, the to conduct risk assessment and treating the unacceptable risk is what we're going to discuss in this class. But establishing the context is basically the initial things that you need to do before you actually starting the risk management process. This includes determining the external and internal environmental factors. You need to find out what external factors affect the risk, the business, and what are the internal risks that the organization faces. So you need to find out these internal and external environment factors. The risk management team also has to define exactly what the framework they want to use. They need to also decide or at least have knowledge and expertise needed to implement the framework, because there are cases where we don't know the value of an asset, for example, and there are people who can actually tell us how much this asset is worth, or risks we may not know, but there are experts who can say, oh, this is high risk, or this is low risk, and so forth. So we need knowledge and expertise in risk management within the team. We also need the context need also include risk appetite of the organization must be accepted by the upper level management and used. And then the team should be able to use the risk appetite to translate the statement into appropriate risk treatment when they reach that phase. Okay. Okay, what is risk? I define risk as a cyber risk as the likelihood. So it's a probability of a threat, cybersecurity threat, exploiting a given vulnerability of an asset. So potentially causing a loss or damage that's impact to the assets. So if you look the underlined and colored words here, cybersecurity risk involves threats, vulnerabilities, and assets. And we also need to actually understand risk is the likelihood of the threat exploiting a vulnerability within the asset. And if this is successful, then there will be a damage to the asset. So that is considered as impact. So that is what really cybersecurity, cyber risk management is trying to determine. Cyber risk is related to threats, vulnerabilities, and assets. And the probability of the threat exploiting the vulnerability to cause damage to the asset. So you have two terms here in this diagram. You can see as you go up on vertically on y-axis, you can see the likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability becomes higher and higher. And also as on the horizontal line, you can see that as the risk impact increases, as the likelihood of the exploitation increases. So risks can be On top, you can see it is very high risk, middle risk, and low risk. You can partition this graph into 3 areas more if you want to, depending on how you define your risks. In this diagram, I defined only 3 levels: high, middle, and low. So you can see that the high level risk are basically very dangerous ones that we need to attend to immediately. Low risks are the ones that we pay attention to and monitor. And the middle one, we have actually some scope to either combine them with high risk or seriously watch them and try to solve them as quickly as possible. So that is what basically cybersecurity risk management is. Okay, based on now these definitions, let me do this. Now, we need an asset, okay, always to do risk analysis or risk management. You must actually identify all your risks, all your assets. Now, each asset has attributes. I will talk about those attributes as well. Then let us include also process in here. Process is an asset, but I'm just including process. This process is actually to say, for example, take input data and process and on these assets and generate some sort of result. So that process is also part of risk analysis. We actually combine as an asset. Process is an asset. As you know, asset could be tangible or intangible. Now we also have a control here. This is cybersecurity control. Now this control prevents or at least protects both process and asset from adversaries. Now at the bottom here we have vulnerabilities. Okay, now these vulnerabilities, assets can have vulnerabilities, processes can have vulnerabilities, and controls can have vulnerabilities, right? Then we have threats. Okay, threats try to exploit vulnerabilities. And if they actually exploit vulnerabilities, then they can cause damage to asset. Okay, so now threats basically are defined by threat agents. Okay, this is threat agent. Now we can actually divide threats into internal threats, I, and outside threats, external threats, O. So threats can be within the organization. In this, if you see, we can have this control can be actually in or outside, but let us say this is our inside, this side is inside from here to here, inside the organization, and threats can also come from here to here from outside. Now, when we talk about threats, we are not talking about attacks. I want you to be clear, and I want you to understand we are talking about potential threats. Attack is when threat is materialized. That means a threat exploits vulnerabilities and cause damage to asset. So that is risk. So the attack is when threat exploits vulnerability and access, say for example, asset, patient information. Then we say attack is success, attack occurred. So attack is not actually the same as vulnerabilities. Whenever you talk about, say, SQL injection attack, that is an attack. It's not a threat. So you need to make sure that when you do risk analysis, we only consider the threats here that you see, the assets that you see here, which includes controls, and the vulnerabilities that you see here. Is that makes sense to you guys? Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Jamal.
Okay. So make sure that this is what you really need to understand to do the assignment. Okay, now, as I said, we can actually quantify risks in terms of qualitative, quantitative methods, but quantitative or quantitatively or qualitatively, but we can apply different methodologies to undertake the risk evaluation and risk assessments. This includes quantitative methods, qualitative methods, and hybrid. Qualitative methods use, as I said, subjective terms like high, medium, or low to assign value to risks, to assign values to likelihood of a threat exploiting vulnerabilities, and so forth. So they use this subjective value. Qualitative risk, on the other hand, they use numbers. But the qualitative methods are very simple. In fact, simpler than both quantitative and hybrid methods, because they actually based on subjective values. They are much simpler and much quicker to do than the hybrid and quantitative methods. In fact, many times when we do this risk analysis or we do consulting for risk assessment, uh, we actually start with the qualitative risk because they can provide quickly valuable insights, especially when the quantitative data is limited. So when you don't have data at hand, you can quickly start with qualitative methods and then try to, after you collect the data, try to combine the data with what you have already done. Now, the problem is with this method, qualitative method, is less precise compared to quantitative and hybrid method. It may not accurately reflect actually the true level of risks because it's based on opinions. You also, if you have not done many times these risks, or you don't know the value of the assets, the risk level of threats and all this, you need expert opinion, someone who knows about this. Otherwise, you cannot perform qualitative risk analysis. It is expert opinion is very, very important to actually have some values. Quantitative method is basically uses numbers, numerical values, sometimes percentages, 30%, 40%, to actually assign values to risks. Now, it's more precise as compared to qualitative method, and helps really to analyze and make decisions better than qualitative method. Now, the hybrid method allows you to combine both. Quite often, we actually do the hybrid method because, as I said earlier, we start with getting insights when we don't have data. Qualitative method is used, and then once we collect data, we actually now try to implement quantitative method. So this combination is what is called hybrid method. It allows you to really use the advantages of both while avoiding the disadvantages of both. We will be talking about these methods throughout this week and next week. Okay. So please stop me whenever you have questions. I don't mind, okay? Now, this diagram basically shows you the overall risk management components. Now, cyber risk management is a systematic approach that we use for three important things. We use it to identify risks that an organization faces. So we call these risk assessments. We use it to evaluate the likelihood and potential impact of the identified risk. We call this risk evaluation. This one will be covered next week. The identifying risk or risk assessment will be covered today. And then we have we need to actually implement a security control to ensure, or at least to reduce, the impacts of risks that we identified on the organization. This step is called risk treatment, which will be discussed also next week. Now, I have not included here another step. It is, you don't actually do anything with this, the fourth step. It's basically monitoring and reviewing. So we keep monitoring. So remember, when I talked about define cyber risk, the low risks, we don't ignore them. We actually monitor them and review constantly, because they could be low today, they know tomorrow they become very critical risks. So there is a monitoring and reviewing process here, which is not part of really cyber risk management proper. So today I will be talking about risk assessment, but tomorrow, next week, I'll do the other two processes.
Hello, Professor. So I just wanted to ask, like, if the risk assessment part is the only one which is up for assessment 2, right?
No, this is assessment 3. Assessment 2, there is no risk management.
Oh,
If I'm talking about the project, the group project is on risk assessment.
okay, got it, got it.
I think that's the okay. Now, as I said, I will be talking about only this phase today, the risk assessment phase. Now, the risk assessment phase basically is the first operational phase that you do when you do risk management process. A good understanding of this process is very important. And this diagram also really highlights every step of this process, all the components that you have here, the process and the output from each process. And the TVA that you see at the bottom is the main output from the risk assessment process. This stage really involves you to sort of ask questions such as, what are the assets we want to protect? So this is what we call asset identification. So we need to identify all of our assets. This is called also asset assessment. From the asset assessment, the output will be asset inventory, which is prioritized assets. Okay, so we have to start with asset assessment first. And the next question that we need to ask is, what are the threats that the organization face? So we need to do threat assessment, threat modeling, in particular, to get the output of ranked threats. We need to prioritize threats as well, so we need to rank them. The third question you need to ask yourself is, what are the known and unknown vulnerabilities affecting the organization? Again, here, it is very important that you understand these vulnerabilities. They are known vulnerabilities, they are unknown vulnerabilities. And so we call this vulnerability identification phase. You do this through vulnerability analysis. Last but not least, you need to ask yourself what security controls are in place and what assets do they protect. So you really need to know the assets that the organization has in place and what assets they are protecting. Are they protecting one or two assets? Do they have other capabilities to protect other assets and so forth? So we collect, that's what control assessment means. We collect all this information from these assessments. Again, as I said, every one of these assessments have output. Most of them actually prioritize output except the control inventory. Control inventory is basically the controls that we have, their capabilities, and their effectiveness is always maintained. Okay, so as I said, there are several outputs as you can see on this diagram, but the most important output is the threat vulnerability assessment. This threat vulnerability assessment assets is a model, really. It gives you a visual representation that helps you, clearly see the relationship between assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. So it's a visual representation that helps risk management team to understand the relationship between threats, vulnerabilities, and assets. When you will see how you can actually use this, but before you actually use TVA, you need to have your assets identified, your threats identified, your vulnerabilities identified, and all of these threat asset vulnerabilities are prioritized. And then you use TVA to show the relationship between them in a visual manner. So this is very, very important slide that I want you to understand. Now, the first step with the asset is to identify all of our assets. So asset assessment has 4 steps. As you can see here, asset statement has identification of the assets, classification of the assets, valuation of the assets, and prioritization of the assets. Now, we need to identify all of our assets, and these are the attributes of the asset that you can see. In this table, I have identified a smart camera, media files, Wi-Fi, smart camera app. So in here, the name is one of the attributes of the asset. The asset here is a smart camera, and the tag which uniquely identifies a smart camera is, you can see, DPN 80401 is the tag that the company uses to uniquely identify smart cameras. And so there are other many attributes that companies use. And the last one is the type of the asset. In this case, you can see that smart camera is hardware. And then we have media files, Wi-Fi, smart camera app. Now, if I ask you what type of asset is media? Anyone?
Data, probably.
Data is an asset. Okay, so in cybersecurity, data is actually a unstructured data. It has no meaning, so just a collection. When we collect data from social media, for example, before we process it, link it, and so forth, we simply call it data. Data is an unstructured long data that has not been processed. And once you process it, it becomes information. Information is very important than data, okay? It is information. So because digital files are things like images, videos, audios, okay? So it is an information. You produce videos by actually processing certain informations, right? It could be if this is actually a hospital organization, then you can see that there are images on these what you call X-rays. With sometimes it has your number written on there and the date and sometimes I don't know if they do it now, but earlier they also put names on it. But you can still see from the information there, you can see a lot of things. That is actually an information. It's a processed information, and data and information are different. Okay. What about smart camera control app? Anyone?
It'll be system software or something.
Yes, exactly. So it is actually a software type. Okay, the type is software. What about Wi-Fi?
Yeah, network asset.
Yes, network asset. That's correct. So you actually not only collect your assets and tags and others. At this stage, you also need to identify whether it is hardware asset, information asset, system asset, network asset, and so forth. You have to actually classify them in terms of types. So you collect all hardwares together, you collect all softwares together, systems together, and so forth. Now, if I added their operating system, for example, if I say uh, Linux, Unix, Microsoft, NT, for example, if I put in there something like that, then you could actually say that are actually systems, operating systems, database management systems, and so forth. These are system assets. Okay, now the second aspect here, if you see classification is the second one. Now, in order to do classification, we have actually a classification model. It's called business classification model and military classification model. Military classifications use highly secret uh, uh, classified, unclassified, and so forth. So that is the terminology they use. At the end of the day, they are the same. Business uses different terminology, military uses different terminologies. But what at the end of the day we want to do is to make sure that they are classified appropriately and they are protected appropriately. If you see here, the classification in this example uses public, private, confidential, and sensitive. So they are organizations usually use 4 level of classification. For assets, there are organizations that use 3. There are organizations that use 4. And sometimes they use the same, like what you see here, public, private, confidential, sensitive. Sometimes they use different terminologies, but they are all the same. Okay, what we wanted to do is we wanted to classify assets that everyone can access. So, for example, if you see the Deacon website, you will be able to see SIT284. Everybody can access it. So that information is there. And this type of information, we call them public. Anyone can access it. So we classify them as a public information. Then we have private. This private is purely for internal use. Not everyone in the public, but privately, internally, you can actually access this information. Now, confidential is restricted. Restricted from not everyone inside the organization can see it, but only restricted individuals. For example, the strategic plan can only be seen by very senior management, for example. It is restricted. Whereas anything that is private, and every employee can see it. Okay, so again, there is a difference between these two. Then we have sensitive. This is highly sensitive data, such as private information of customers, financial information of customers. These are highly restricted. So they are on top in terms of classification and priority on top of the assets. So here you can see as an example, a smart camera is confidential because these smart cameras can whatever it does, it is restricted because that information, whatever information it's collected, is not to be seen by everyone, but to be seen by a select people, systems administrators, and if there is incident, that incident to be actually passed on to appropriate individuals. So that's why it is confidential. Now, how do we decide whether an asset is public, private, confidential, or sensitive? We look at some certain criterias. For example, if the asset is, we look at the asset's criticality. How essential is the asset? Is it essential to business? Is it critical to business operations? If it is critical to business or mission critical to business, then we say this asset is very critical. It has to be very sensitive, okay? If the asset, we can also look at how sensitive the asset is. If the data processed, for example, or stored on the assets, then we can say, okay, this is also very confidential or sensitive. Is the asset required by regulatory compliance? So does the asset handle data subjects to specific regulations? So if that applies to, that becomes very sensitive because regulations, compliance to regulations require that the data is sensitive and must be highly restricted, and its access must be highly restricted. So you can look at, is it regulatory compliance applies to this asset? Is it sensitive? Is it critical to functioning of the business? Based on that, you can say, okay, this is private, this is confidential, this is sensitive, and this is public. So these are the way we classify in real environments. Okay, so what do you think about media? Do you think it's confidential, public, private, sensitive?
So I believe media files are referring to like video content which is present on their website, which is for public use.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think it would depend on what the actual media files are, because they could be completely public and available for public access, or they could contain sensitive details for internal use only, or even more confidential for only certain parts of the business.
That's
So
excellent answer.
it would depend on the actual specific type of media files they are. So that might need to be broken down a bit more.
Yes, that's an excellent answer. Now, if the files are intended for public, it's public, right? So if it is intended for public consumption. But if the files are for internal use only, then it is private. So as you said, Karen, it depends on how the files are used. Even it can be sensitive if the files contain sensitive or confidential information. Sometimes we can also have, as I said, in the case of the hospitals, we can have very sensitive both audio, video, and other types of multimodal information stored on these media files. It depends on the type of information stored in there and the criticality or sensitivity or the regularity requirements of those information in there. What about Wi-Fi?
Okay, so Wi-Fi is like common enough to be not be restricted because everyone with internal access should be able to join it. At the same time, it shouldn't let external people connect to it. So I believe it should be in internal use and private classification.
Private is okay, but when you said from user perspective, right? So from internal user perspectives, but it can be also sensitive, right? Because internal threads can actually pose problem to it, right? So
Yeah.
you can try to use it within restricted. You can restrict the usage based on maybe your level of, for example, you can't actually set up something or reconfigure the Wi-Fi or do something to it. You can just connect and disconnect. Otherwise, you create problem because it is mission or business critical asset. I prefer to call it sensitive. If it is down, then the whole communication stops in there, right? Particularly if you have a smart home, for example, and if the Wi-Fi is down, the whole thing, the temperature control doesn't work, and the fridge does not actually get information. Maybe the heater gets wrong information and blows the heat and so forth. So the network in this case is considered sensitive. Okay, now this is the difficult one. Up till now, you don't have any problem. It's the problem starts here. Each asset you collected, you need to actually determine how much the value of this asset. What is how much it's worth? It's not easy question, but it is the most important parameter in risk assessment. Asset value is really one of the key risk assessment parameters. We basically collected the asset. We wanted to find out how much my camera is worth, how much my Wi-Fi is worth. So this is the step where you determine the value of your asset. Now, keep in mind that it's not necessary to determine the precise value of an asset when you do risk assessment. Okay, there is possibility you can actually overvalue the asset, and there is possibility to undervalue the asset. But what we are interested here is we make little bit, plus or minus 3-4% is okay. So we don't actually go over, but absolutely, we are not interested in determining the exact value unless we have that information available to us. Okay, so in your assignment, when you determine the value of an asset, you can actually use market research. There are a lot of market research information that gives you the value of the asset. There are also industry reports and publications that tells you the value of the asset. You can also get it from vendor websites, this value of the asset, but make sure you clearly describe and justify and cite the source. So if you actually get it from market research, you need to say this information is gathered from market research, and here is the site. The reason we used market research is this is the most trusted source, and this is what we believe closer to the real value of the asset. So you need to really justify, you need to cite the source. Now, there are three different types of values when we talk about asset values. There is actual values. This is a real value of the asset. And practically, it's very difficult to exactly determine the genuine value of an asset. And also very hard to know because some assets depreciate, some assets appreciate, some assets don't really have value that we can put value on it, for example. So it is really, really difficult. But as I said, we are not really interested in determining the genuine value of an asset, but approximate value is fine. So approximate value is really relative value. So the relative value is what you need to do when you do risk analysis. This is just approximation. The relative value of an asset can be both quantitative, or qualitative. Okay. So the intrinsic value is also there, an estimate of the actual value of an asset. Again, this you have to be expert or hire experts to actually give you this intrinsic value of an asset. Hybrid is what I always use. You can mix these actual relative intrinsic values together to come up with an asset value. Okay. Now, every time you get an asset, take an asset, and you wanted to find its value, you look at three things, okay? What is the economic value of this asset? I'm looking at the economic value of the asset. And I look at what is the operational value of this asset. And the third one is what is the strategic value of the asset. So by looking at this economic value, operational value, and strategic value of the asset, determining the value becomes a little bit easier because you know that anything that's strategically valuable to the asset, to the organization, is very, very expensive. So does economic value, so does operational value. So when you look at the economic value, for example, you can ask yourself questions like, does the asset generate how much revenue it generates? Does it generate the most revenue generation asset? Okay. Does the asset produce the highest profit for the organization? Would the asset be the most expensive to replace? This is when you look at the economic value, you can actually ask these kinds of questions. For operational values, you can basically look at would the asset be the most expensive to protect? Okay. You could also consider the contribution of the asset to the day-to-day operations of the business. When you prompt the asset in terms of operational values. The strategic value, again, is, as I said, is important one. You can, for example, ask questions such as, is the asset most critical to the success of the organization's strategic plan? Is it used to develop innovative products and services? Is it improve customer experiences and gain a competitive advantage? All these things, yeah, you need to ask questions in terms of strategic value of the asset. Okay, so there are many different ways you can actually calculate also the value of an asset. You can see for actual asset, if you take a laptop, for example, you can calculate this by using direct method. This method basically relies on direct market transactions. It only applies to tangible assets. Intangible assets like logos, for example, you can't actually use direct calculation or direct method. The second one is market approach. This is actually basically says the current market value of the asset. What is the current market value of the asset? Uh, Again, while there is no direct market for logos, for example, you can find a business brand or trademarks that are very close to your logo, for example, that you are trying to assess for its value, how close it is with other brands and trademarks, or that are recently sold. So based on that, you can actually say, okay, our brand is very close to this, so our logo can be valued at this amount. Uh, Again, based on the actual method, you can use expert opinion. This is widely used, but this you need to hire expertise in this area to judge the value of your asset. There are many other areas where there are experts, where you take an item to them and they can actually tell you the current worth of that particular item. The same thing here, there are experts that can actually tell you the amount of your software, it is current value, or your logo, okay? Then there is, for relative value of an asset, there are many different approaches. You can basically do the comparison approach. This approach asks you to do benchmarking. You benchmark your asset against businesses of the same industry or market segment. So they can, if they actually wanted to assess their a particular asset, they can compare. They can, we say, for example, Swinburne, RMIT, or so forth. So you need to compare, do benchmarking with other organizations of similar structure, similar approach, similar number of students, and so forth. The other one is utility approach. Again, this is subjective evaluation of the assets. For example, if you look at the logo example I'm using here, if you want to value that particular logo of your organization, you really need to determine its value based on perceived usefulness. So how useful is this logo if somebody buy from me? And what contributions this logo makes to overall strategy of the organization. So based on that, utility approach uses these two concepts to compute approximate value or relative value of the asset. Now, the other one is the cost-based approach. This cost-based is how much it would cost to buy. So if I want to replace it, how much it will cost me to buy. If it is software, how much it costs me to develop it. If it is data, how much it costs me to recreate it. So you can replace it you can find the replacement cost, you can find the development cost, redevelopment cost, or you can actually determine the recreation cost. So based on these, you can actually assign the value to asset. Now, for example, if you look at the logo that I have been talking about, if I use this cost method, I will actually decide on how much it's going to cost me for legal fees, how much it's going to cost me to license it and register the logo. That's how much cost for legal registration, and how much it costs me to design and develop, and how much it costs me to produce it, and how much it costs me to market it. So by adding these costs together, I can actually come up with certain values. Okay, but the problem here is the legal fees. When we developed this logo, maybe 10 years back, the legal fees now have changed. So we need to always make sure that we have somewhere to weight the value. So the legal fees can be weighted more by adding, say, for example, 10%, 20%, whatever the value that we developed when we developed the logo. The legal cost is $20. Now it becomes 30. So we need to make sure that these adjustments have to be made. Now, there is no best method, okay? So the best method to use depends on the specific value of the asset that you are after. So some informations are very easy to determine the value, but some are very, very difficult. And so it is a mix of them that works well. Okay. Now here you can see example of possible asset values. I have camera, okay, here. I have camera here. This is my asset. You can see that the qualitatively, I said it is very high. So as I said, you can use both of these quantitative and qualitative methods. You can also use the hybrid. So in here, camera is very high. The reason for the camera to be high is protects privacy, security, and monitoring. Compromise has significant risk. So I am actually giving reason for valuing this asset as high. But if I look at the quantitative method, so I said the camera value is 35,000 K. I give the reason here. So I bought the camera 500. The operational impact that this camera has is 20,000. The data sensitivity that this camera holds is 10,000. So if I add all these costs, all this amount together, it becomes 35K. So this is how I actually justify this 35K. You can do for each one of these in a very similar manner to really value your asset. Now, asset prioritization is, again, another area that students have problem with, okay? So now you can see the asset here. Now, replace this by student names, okay? So for example here, Sam and Lee and Krishna and so forth. So you can put names here, and you can put here assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3. So the criterions are assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3. And the weight is for each assignment. As our assignment 1 is 30%, our assignment 2 is 30%, our assignment 3 is 40%. They have to add to 100, okay? So the criterias are the assignments, the weights for each assignment are used here. And so the scores here is that Sam actually scored as in assignment 1 80%, in assignment 2 is 80%, in assignment 3 is 80%. Now the weighted score is 80%, because if you add this together and divide, that's what you get, 80%. Okay, and the same thing we do for prioritizing our asset. So here you can see that I have the asset names. And here I have the monetary value for this asset is my criteria, operational impact is my criteria, and data sensitivity is my criteria. So I have 3 criterias. Now, for each criteria, in the same manner, I said 30%, 30%, 40%. I can say my data sensitivity will be 40% important criteria when I actually assess the asset. The operational impact is 30%, monetary value is 30%. So this is now basically I have my assets, I have my criterias, I have my weights, okay? Now the weights, these weights are for each other criteria, okay? Now for each asset, you need to actually put the criteria, the values here, the scores. For smart camera, for example, you need to say how important the monetary values for smart camera. If it is important, any value you can put between 0 to 1. So you can put 0.8, for example, to say 80%. You can put 0.7, but you need to be very careful when you put this, because you need to look at the criteria. How important is this criteria for this particular asset? So you can complete this in here. You can put the value here and for each assets. So that is step 1 and step 2. So step 1, you put your assets. Step 2, you create your criteria. Step 3, you assign the weight for each criteria. Step 4, you actually you include the scores for each asset relative to the criteria here. Okay. Now, the values in here, as I said, is between 0.1 to 1. So 1 means 100 maximum. And these 3 values must be added. Oh, no, there's some must not exceed 100. Okay. Now, if you want to compute the score, okay, so you take the value here, you take the value. If I have 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. Now, here is 30. This is 30, it's not 50. This is 30. This is 40. So they add to 100. Now, what you really need to do is to compute the score weight. So you multiply 0.1, this value, by this value, multiply by 30%. Okay, plus 0.2 times 30% plus 0.3 times 40%. So this will give you, if you add them up, multiply and add them up, it will give you this one, the weight score. Now you do this for each one of them. You do this for media file, you do this for Wi-Fi, you do this for smart value, okay? Now you will get things like, let us say, I'm just putting here, it's not the correct value, okay? I haven't computed here. You may get something like 0.8 here. You may get 1.0 here. You may get, this is the maximum you get, 1.0, 0.6. You may get 0.9. Okay? So now once you get that, the final step is to rank the assets. Now you just look at these values, okay? You can see that 1 is the highest. So I will just put here number 1. And 0.9 is the second. I will put this number 2. 0.8 is the highest. I'll put number 3. And 0.1 will be number 4. So this is how I actually generate priority of the assets. Okay, is that clear? Do you want me to repeat, or it's clear? Okay. Now the same way we actually now will look at the vulnerabilities. Our vulnerabilities, I want you to really go to this site, okay? I want you to visit this site. Very important. You visit these sites for the assignment. You have all types of vulnerabilities. Latest one, last year's, 3 days ago, all the vulnerabilities are there for you. And if you visit that site, you will get the vulnerabilities, you'll get many of the informations that you need to compute the vulnerability, to finish the vulnerability assessment. Okay, so now this is the outcome of this vulnerability assessment. You want to determine really what is the vulnerability of the assets. Again, as I said, for each asset, you can go to this particular asset database, and you can pick up the vulnerability, and you can simply describe, okay, here is my asset. The vulnerability for this particular asset is physical access to device, and for impact here is theft, damage, unauthorized access. The severity is high, the likelihood is high, and then you rank, because high and high is always rank 1. Okay, but sometimes you may have 2 highs. It doesn't matter the ranking, you can put them 1, 1, 2. But if you have only 1 high, you can put 1. Severity, you will be also calculating, but as I said, if you go to this site, you can get the severity data of this vulnerability. The likelihood also is there for you. So really all you need to do in terms of vulnerability assessment, if you access this data, is really to identify your assets, describe this and describe this. That's all. Okay. Now, this is as an example. Threat, as I said, we actually look at threat. I will talk about threats and threat agents next week in detail. We actually do now here threat assessment. We look at online documents. Mostly we base on threat intelligence, a lot of threat intelligence documents online. You can actually look at those threat intelligence. What are the threats against cameras? What are the threats against Wi-Fi? Now, again, I want to stress these threats and attacks are not the same. They are different. What we are after is really threats. So inside threat is a threat actor. Okay, it's a threat is different, but the person who actually causes or may implements the threat is the threat actor. Inside the threat is a threat actor. Threat is, for example, uh, accessing the camera. Physical access of this camera, for example, is a threat, or manipulating the firmware is a threat. Okay, and the person who does that is called threat agent. I'll talk about threat agent. This part is very important, but I will complete uh, these threats and threat agents analysis next week, because it goes with next week's component. So what we will do next week, because we don't really have this information now, we will be looking at, okay, I have an asset. The most step, what we process in this step is we wanted to determine the threats. In here, we identified 7 threats for 4 assets. So camera has 2 threats, media has 2 threats, Wi-Fi has 1 threat, and apps have 2 threats. Then we will put the threat agents in this column, and then we will determine the likelihood of the threat materializing, and if the threat materialize, what will be the impact. And then based on the likelihood and the impact, we will generate the risk score. And based on the risk scores for these assets, we can then, for the risk scores of these threats, then we can rank the threats. But next week, I will talk how we drive likelihood and impact quantitatively. But you can use, again, as I said, if you have information, likelihood is high, impact is very high, and then your risk score becomes high as well. If it is low and low, you can do low and low. Okay. Now you need to also identify the controls. All I'm doing is actually identifying assets, vulnerabilities, threats, and controls. So we need to identify and generate table like this in terms of controls. So these controls, what we really need to know is what controls are there, what assets they protect, what kind of vulnerabilities they can prevent, what kind of, what are the potential controls we have, and also we need to rank them in terms of the number of, if we have this information, the number of, if we monitor our controls, their performance every maybe month, every week, every 2 weeks, we can collect their data and we can rank them also if we want to do. But the most important thing is we wanted to list the controls we have. So we have vulnerability. This is physical access vulnerability to smart device. We have these controls already in place. These controls can be applied to this vulnerability. So the only decision we need to make is that how much each one of these contribute, or do we need another one to make sure that physical access to smart camera will not happen. If any one of these gives us sufficient control, then we don't really need to buy another one. That's what we do in risk treatment aspect, risk evaluation session next week. This is the TVA. So the TVA, again, as I said, it gives you a visual representation of the relationship between threats, vulnerabilities, and assets. Now, after you rank your assets based on the methods I discussed here, on this method, this will actually gives you the ranking of the asset, and this will give you the ranking of the vulnerabilities. This will give you the ranking of the threats. You use this ranking to actually create this TVA. Now, if you see this, threat 1, threat 2, threat 3 is really the priorities. Threat 1 is high priority, and threat 8 is the lowest priority. Okay, so the threat priorities goes that way. The asset priorities goes that way. Asset 1 is the highest priority, and asset 5 is the lowest priority. Now, you have identified the vulnerabilities already, and you know that the vulnerability of the asset. So you put which of these threats really can exploit these particular vulnerabilities to cause damage to asset. Okay, so if you have vulnerability 1, for example, and this vulnerability is part of, related to asset 1, then this threat must be able to exploit this vulnerability that you put in here to cause damage to asset 1 or to access asset 1. So you put that vulnerability in here. And the same thing, if you have a vulnerability that is associated with asset 1 but can be exploited by threat 3, you put that vulnerability in here. Okay, so now this threat and asset connection can have more vulnerabilities can be included in here because an asset can have many vulnerabilities, and a particular threat can act on many vulnerabilities as well. So that's why you can have vulnerabilities 1 or 2 here and more. Now, if the vulnerability does not exist between threat and asset, you just put X, which basically says there is no vulnerability that can be exploited by threat 1 that access asset 1. So that's what X means. Okay, today we actually defined what risk management is. And we gave 3 components of risk management. And in particular, we focused on risk identification, which is basically risk assessment, risk identification of assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and controls. We also discussed about major phases for each one of these that we need to complete in order to do the identification of the assets and also vulnerabilities, how to prioritize them. And we also explored many different phases of each asset, threats, and vulnerability. So remember, threat is not an attack. Vulnerability is not a threat. So you also remember assets can be hardware assets, software assets, information assets, knowledge assets, and so forth. So they have classifications. And when we do risk analysis, these classifications are extremely important. Okay, I stop here. I'm happy if you have any questions, I'll entertain. If you want me to go back to any slide, I can go back and explain it to you as well. Okay, scores, how are they calculated? Which scores, which part? Is there any list of questions? Wait now. Asset prioritization. Let me go back to that slide again. Okay, so now you look at this smart camera, okay? Now you have here the criteria and the weight of that criteria. Okay, and there is criteria here and there is criteria each one of these weights. If I understand, the question is how to determine these values. Am I right? Okay. Okay. Now, if this criteria is performed, or let us look at operational impact. If this asset goes down, what will be the overall impact on the organization? If you think that's high, you assign value between 8 to 9. Anything from 7 to 1 is okay. But I usually look at this 0.8 to 1.0. So if it impacts seriously, okay, disrupts the whole organization. But if the impact is low, I will assign between 0 to 0.1 to 0.3. So it's low. If the impact is medium, I will say, okay, so the camera is down but can be repaired quickly. So I will assign value between 0.4 to 0.7. So that is how I determine. Hope this answers your question. I was wondering when we can. Okay, threat is not an attack. Some students actually confuse between threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities. People actually they talk about vulnerability as a threat. That is incorrect. Vulnerability is weakness. Threat is a potential threat. Okay. Attack is something after the threat is successful. Threat doesn't happen. Attack is after the attack happened. We say attack occurred. This is an attack. Threat is a threat. It's a risk, but it's not happened yet. Attack is already happened. So don't confuse between these three concepts. Vulnerability is a weakness in the asset. It could be the control, it could be the network, it could be your laptop, it could be the system or the application. So vulnerabilities are the weakness in these assets. Is that makes clear? No, it's not a potential attack. You can look at it that way, but a threat is a potential risk. Attack is already happened, okay? When the threat is translated into a damage, that we say it is an attack. Any other questions? Okay, you can always ask me online. I'll be more than happy to answer. I'll see you next week. Again, please really pay attention to this 2 weeks slide. They are very important, and all informations you need is here. Okay? Okay. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jamal.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.